So, good afternoon. What would be the best way to characterize the current phase of the Israeli high-tech industry? All of you are looking for the best investments, the most exciting technologies with the greatest team in the hottest market segments. Is the current opportunity in Israel interesting? I would say that the current state of affairs in the tech industry in Israel is both unique and challenging. And the best way of describing that would be, in my mind, to characterize the industry as mature and young. Over the past 30 plus years, we've developed a DNA, a culture of the Israeli tech. The industry gave birth to generations of entrepreneurs that are experienced, seasoned. Many of them are serial entrepreneurs going back to the game time and time again. But in addition to companies that are led by experienced people, we have many companies that are led by tremendously young people, people coming out of the military service with unique ideas, to a large extent more ambitious and courageous than their predecessors. So what I would like to do is to examine this notion of an industry which is both mature and young in three dimensions. The first dimension is investments and exits. It's a financial look at what the industry does. The amount of investments in the Israeli tech is constantly growing. In 2018, it has reached a total amount of $6.5 billion. So the dollar figure is definitely impressive. But if you look at the actual number of investments, you see a decrease in 2018. And when you look closer into the numbers, and you look at two separate segments, seed investments of below $5 million and growth investments of more than $20 million, it becomes more interesting because you see a decrease both in number and amount in the smaller investments, but a very impressive growth in the larger investments of more than $20 million. And in fact, in 2018 alone, there have been 100 investments of more than $20 million. So what does that reflect? It reflects a shift in culture. It reflects the fact that today Israeli companies are looking to become bigger, stronger, global enterprises. So it's no longer an industry that only looks for innovative technologies and a wish to realize value as soon as possible, but rather an interest in building global businesses and long-term plans. And there are many funds who are willing to support that. There are many funds that are willing to be patient, and they're willing to provide the entrepreneurs with the financial support for doing so, including liquidity in secondary transactions for founders, employees, and early-stage investors. Obviously, with this setup, the expectations for an exit become greater because investments are done at higher valuations. And in order for investors to justify their investment, they need to show the appropriate multiples. And when we look at the exit activity, we see that there is, generally speaking, a growth in the total dollar value of exits. But again, the number of exit transactions has decreased in the last few years. And when you combine that with the increased investment in growth companies, you realize that there is a pipeline of many companies that are investing in long-term growth of their businesses. But in order to reach exit, they need time. They need to reach milestones of performance, and the investors realize that. So many of the companies would take longer time to reach to an exit, and the expectation of value is great. And in many cases, people do talk about a $1 billion exit. That is no longer an illegitimate statement. In fact, only in 2018, we had 5 exits of more than $1 billion. And for an example, a few months ago, we sold a company by the name Datorama to Salesforce for $850 million, which is a very impressive number. But in fact, no one around the table had any doubt that this is an appropriate value for the transaction. These long-term plans for these companies to try and reach maturity require patience, firm and consistent growth policy, but it requires also to be flexible and agile. And just an example, a company I worked with by the name Redband that was providing a software solution for telecom operators, consistently working for over 10 years to try and build its business. At some point made a pivot to the auto industry, came up with an interesting story and was able to be sold to Harman at a very impressive return for investors due to that patience and agility. The second dimension are the players. Traditionally, we've used to see the VCs and the entrepreneurs as the key players in the market. But as time passes, the scene is much more diverse. We have many more investors. We have a fairly complex picture of the types of investors. So in addition to the traditional VCs, we have many corporate VCs, many corporations making strategic investments. We have angels, incubators, accelerators. So the picture has become very diverse. And that means that for many of you, the investors, if you look for an opportunity to invest, you should expect a very competitive market. Just an example, we had last year a transaction we sold with a client of ours, Teammate, a company by the name Signia. Teammate is a hub for building cyber companies. It was set up by a few veterans of the Israeli military intelligence that managed cyber organizations for many years. And they've decided that what they want to do is to try to build companies together with very young entrepreneurs. So they come up with the idea, they set up the team with young guys and the older guys working together with a group of strategic investors together. This recipe of 3 different types of players together allows them to reach success in such an impressive time cycle. When we look at the regions of the investors, we see that Israel and US are still the primary types of investors, but we do see Asian investors gradually coming in. But I should say Chinese investors are still making a lot of effort, due diligence, exploration, but the conversion rate into actual transactions is not very high. Many of the companies that we see in Israel came in through acquisitions. After making an acquisition in Israel, they've managed to get access to unique and interesting technologies. And actually, for the entrepreneurs, the availability of these players alongside with them is extremely important. So if originally most of the acquirers in Israel were the large usual suspects, the Intels and the Facebooks of the world, we now see new entrants, different types of players that come in, some of which are not obvious at all. We just announced yesterday a transaction in which McDonald's, the hamburger company, acquired an Israeli company by the name Dynamic Yield. So the types of players that are coming in are very diverse and definitely make it more interesting. The third dimension is the talent. The growth in number of companies and the capital being deployed implies a great demand for employees, qualified employees. Currently in Israel, there is great shortage. The population in Israel is unable to satisfy the demand for employees, even though there is a kind of a shift today and many youngsters prefer to study sciences rather than humanities in the university. Still, there is a big shortage. In fact, if you think about it, the Jewish mother that always hoped for her son to be a lawyer or a doctor now wishes her son to be a high-techist. So that's probably why my wife is so happy that my daughter is not going in my footsteps and is studying bioengineering. But the result of this huge demand is increase in salaries. The salaries in the high-tech industry consistently grow, and they become much higher than other sectors of society. That means that the cost for companies increasingly becomes significant in terms of funding their operations. The fact that we have so many R&D centers in Israel of global companies makes the competition even more significant, because these companies, in an attempt to enhance their capabilities, are offering very attractive compensation terms that make it even more difficult for the startups to recruit people. So some of them are outsourcing development activities to Eastern Europe, but it's still a big challenge in terms of recruitment of employees in Israel. So if we aggregate together these financial and people dimensions, we see that the industry today has a tremendous infrastructure, has a lot of experience that was gathered and created over the years. And even though we have a lot of significant experienced players, the industry itself is very young, innovative, and creative. And just to sum up, some of you probably know that an Israeli spacecraft was launched a few weeks ago on its way to the moon. We hope that everything will go smoothly and it will actually land on the moon in April of this year. And that probably shows you, because to come up with such a project, you need a very significant infrastructure. You need capabilities. You need experience. It's very ambitious. But in order to do something of this nature, you need to be extremely optimistic and to have a tremendous vision. That definitely characterizes the spirit of the Israeli entrepreneurs, and I think that symbolizes what we would like to see in the Israeli tech industry. Thank you.